Good morning. I'm Lee Barton, today's worship associate. Before our service begins, I invite you to pay attention to these announcements. We are in our summer session, which means that our minister, Reverend Heather, is taking a well-deserved break, and our members are preaching on Sundays through August. Our topic this week comes from member Martin Newhouse, head of the New England Legal Foundation, on the topic of religious freedom. Next week, we will hear from Kai Flannery, our summer minister, on the topic of bravery. Please reach out to kai@winchesteruu.org if you are thinking through something or would like a chance to discuss something close to your heart. Several children and families in the congregation are getting together for regular hikes in the woods. If you'd like to participate, please email Naomi at naomimagnoni@gmail.com. Kai will post in the chat. For information about this and all events in our society, please visit our website to read our e-newsletter highlights or find highlights in your email. And now, let us open our hearts and minds to the spirit of worship. Good morning, and welcome to the Winchester Unitarian Society, a welcoming, caring community dedicated to spiritual growth, social transformation, and environmental responsibility. Guided by Unitarian Universalist principles and drawing on diverse faith traditions, we live our values through worship, reflection, connection, and service. Here we welcome all, people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, people of all sexual orientations and genders, people of all incomes and abilities, people of all religious beliefs, and people whose beliefs might not necessarily be considered conventionally religious. To all of you who choose to be with us today, we say, welcome. Right after our first reflection, families with young children will be invited to transition to another Zoom room to visit with Ms. Juanita, our nursery leader, for story time. We will post that link in the chat box when it is time. And now we will take a moment to greet one another through the chat function. And if you have some especially good news, we invite you to share it. We will be called back to worship through the ringing of the bells at our partner church in Marosvásárhely, Transylvania.
Thank you all for being here this morning. Our opening words, let me just check to make sure I'm unmuted. Oops.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. I've got to get back to where I was. Our opening words this morning are from a letter that George Washington, our first president, wrote on August 21st, 1790 to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. And in that letter, President Washington wrote the following. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasion their effectual support. It would be inconsistent with the frankness of my character not to avow that I am pleased with your favorable opinion of my administration and fervent wishes for my felicity. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. May the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make us all in our several vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way, everlastingly happy. And now I'm going to ask Nancy Scott to recite the words for the lighting of our chalice this morning.
Good morning. The chalice burns with twin flames. The first flame burns for those who seek and defend the right to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning so that each person may live according to conscience in a democratically elected society. The second flame burns for defenders of freedom, working against those who would impose their own religious beliefs on others through intimidation or legislation. May we tend these fires always ever vigilant and courageous in the struggle for freedom and justice for all.
And now please join us in singing our opening hymn, Come, Come, Whoever You Are.
Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times,
come, come, whoever you are, wander, worship, another of thee. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are, wander, worship, another of thee. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come.
Come, yet again come.
Good morning. So it is my joy this morning to offer some words for our young at heart and our youngest members, our first reflection. So today I wanted to share a story of interconnectedness, which has to do with our seventh principle, that we are in a web of life that we are interconnected with and that responsible for, and that's responsible to us. So I'll just say that one of the hardest parts of being interconnected, like in a web with other beings and other people, is making agreements so we can be together. If I want to read a book and you want to watch TV, can we still be in the same room? If you need quiet and I need to see friends, and sometimes our relationship with the earth does not seem to involve agreements at all. Like, what if we ask the birds how they like it when we cut down a tree? I think if we are looking at our interconnectedness and the folks involved, we have to think so hard and listen so hard to each other. And we also have to be able to say what we need. So sometimes when people come together and say yes to each other, they are called a collective. And I wanted to tell you about a collective called Meow Wolf. So Meow Wolf is one example of a neat place where they made agreements as a community of artists and where they successfully created some cool things together. So Meow Wolf is a big warehouse in Santa Fe where first 3 artists and then many artists came together to make a giant shared art project. It's basically a museum that covers all the walls and the ceilings, a museum that has sounds and things that you can touch and things that you can interact with and music. But if you can imagine what it's like to bring your art into a space to share it with others, as you can imagine, they had to make a lot of agreements in order to work together. Because what if somebody paints over your painting? Or what if somebody adds loud music when you want that room to be quiet? They had to talk together and share their vision. There are so many ways to do art. It could be bright colors or muted colors or metal or paper. So sometimes they gave people their own space, and sometimes they created places that people could sit or stand or see each other. And sometimes artists have collaborated at Meow Wolf. So the first 3 artists, who are all guys, decided to call in artists with all different identities. So there are many different kinds of art experiences at Meow Wolf. I got to visit there last week, and I'll show you a picture in just a second about how cool it can be when we can collaborate with others based on our agreements. So Meow Wolf says, we are artists who love working with other artists. Meow Wolf has always been an endeavor of deep, radical collaboration. We believe success is based on continuously pushing one another to be better, to be weirder, to take risks, and to foster relationships. To be better, to be weirder, to take risks, and to foster relationships. From inception through successful implementation of projects, we work together every step of the way, and we are stronger when we are working together. And so at this beautiful immersive art experience, 450 people helped to bring it together. 300 of them are volunteers and 150 of them are artists. There are older people and younger people, people with disabilities, queer people, cis people, hetero people, people of many colors and nationalities. And they all figured out how to tell a story together. So in this big warehouse, you can walk in, and I'm going to start sharing this picture right now, I think, because I don't want you to have to wait any longer. Okay, there we go. So this is an example of a room at Meow Wolf. So there are murals and beautiful alien lights in some places, and there are chairs you can sit on in the middle of a tree that is built by artists. There are rooms that are dark and fuzzy and rooms that are light and bright. There are tiny stairs that were built for kids, but adults can still fit in there. And there are windows that you can climb through and trees that glow. They built a story too together, a mystery that people can solve if they want to do it that way. One thing that happened during COVID is that Meow Wolf, at Meow Wolf, making agreements went to a new level, because people who go to work sometimes don't like what's happening or need to have a voice in what's happening at their own business, and they forget that they can come together. Sometimes we forget that we can come together and ask for what we need. When the pandemic started, we all stayed home, and a lot of museums, including Meow Wolf, stopped being open for some time. And some people at Meow Wolf lost their jobs. But quickly, the workers started a collective bargaining group so that the workers could get together and ask for what they needed. And if you are a kid, or if you've been a kid, you certainly know a lot about collective bargaining. Because I know that when I wanted something when I was a young person, the first person I went to was my sister and then my brother. And we were always stronger if we could agree and try to convince our parents. So that's collective bargaining. Yeah, that when we build a shared story and we say, this is the thing that we all would like to see happen. And because we don't always know each other's needs, sometimes we have to speak up for our own needs and say, please, I need this. And sometimes we have to listen to someone else's needs and say, I hear what you need. That's really important too. And we want to make sure that the collective is serving everybody. So this worker collective, what they decided that their tagline would be, when we work together, we build worlds. And as you can see by this picture, that is really true. So we could say that Meow Wolf is successful because right now they've spread to several cities. I think they're coming to Washington, DC and Denver and Las Vegas. But I don't know if it's really about the money, because I think they would say that they're successful because they help a lot of people experience art in an immersive way, and because they give artists jobs and a lot of people fun jobs to do, and because they get people to work together successfully. So Yeah, thanks for listening to me talk about Meow Wolf. It's one of my favorite places, and I'm really excited to share that with you. I think it is a good example of our seventh principle in action. Okay, and so now soon you can go head out to be with Miss Juanita, and we would like to, because she's got some story time and some fun things to do in a separate Zoom room. So I'm going to put that link in the chat, and also we're going to sing to you. If you are going to head out into this separate group, we're going to sing to you right now.
May the light within you shine before you every day. May the light within you shine before you, guide your way, guide your way. May the love we share surround you and chase your fears away. May the light within you shine before you. This we pray, this we pray.
So we come to the time in our service of sharing. In our summer services, we share our joys and sorrows with one another. I'm Kai Flannery, and I'm a summer minister here at Winchester. And I would love to hear how it's been going for you. Maybe something that's lifted you up, maybe something that's been hard this past week. And if you would like to lift up a hand or raise a hand here in Zoom, I'd be super glad to unmute you. And hey, Fritzy. And yeah, you can share and I'll light a candle. Is that working?
Oh, yes, there we go. Forgot to unmute. So I just want to send some special love and healing energy out to Beth O'Donnell. She's been struggling with cancer for a long time, and she's in a pretty difficult phase, experiencing a lot of pain. So I just invite everybody to send her a lot of love. I'm sure she would appreciate cards, occasional visits, short visits. If you feel comfortable with that, you can check with her husband, Ken. But she's been a member for a long time and a co-leader of one of our longtime covenant groups. And so we're trying to send her a lot of love. Thanks.
Thank you, Fritzy. And you love to Beth and Ken at this really difficult time. Thank you. I know this community is really important to them. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to offer? So maybe you could see from the first reflection that one of my joys is that I got to travel to Santa Fe and I got to see the Guadalupe Mountains. So I would like to light a candle for the Guadalupe Mountains because they're just very lovely. And I hadn't really gotten to be all up in there before, and that was really lovely. Yeah, Fritzy. No. Yes. Okay. Here we go. Okay.
So just to say again, this is actually some gratitude for you, Kai, because you have a lot of experience with cooperative living and collaboration. And you shared that so beautifully with our young folks when you were helping with our 7th and 8th grade Faith in Action by bringing them down to your co-op house and showing how people live together in real intentional agreement. And that was a real fun, memorable time that stuck with them. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I remember that fondly. There were a lot of pancakes.
Lots of pancakes.
Lots of pancakes. For all the people that lived at the house and all the people who came from Winchester to visit, which was really nice. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Fritzy. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to share? Yeah, John, here, let me unmute you. There you go.
Hello there. This is my first time at the gathering, so I appreciate you accepting me. I just wanted to say a sort of sending warmth and well wishes for a friend of some very close cousins who has a breakthrough infection of COVID-19, a young adult who had been vaccinated. And I only learned about this because my 6-year-old daughter and I were going to travel to see these cousins at Lake George in New York State just last weekend. And literally the day we were about to travel, we learned about this infection. And although all of the adults there have been vaccinated, we're concerned about our children for whom there's no vaccine yet. And so more and more in the news, I've been hearing of this kind of thing happening. And I just wanted to think of the struggle of our society to protect ourselves and our children.
Thank you, John. That is so much on our minds right now. Yes, absolutely. Keeping our kids safe, and for the folks who have these breakthrough infections, this is a scary time. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Bob, please go ahead. Or here, I've asked you to unmute. Does that work?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just wanted to share a bit of joy that I'm experiencing right now, and this happens fairly often. My young 9-year-old grandson is overnight with me. One of his parents is not feeling very well, and this is a chance to help out, but it's a lot of fun for us. And we walked around to the Mystic Lake yesterday and swam. And the Portuguese community from Cambridge collects there on the weekends, and you can hear them playing their soccer games. And my grandson wants to become a professional soccer player. So we enjoyed that. And then we walked home and had a good supper and watched a little more soccer. And this morning, we've had a good breakfast, and he is reading now. We have to somewhat limit the TV, but parents called and they'll come later for him. But this is a chance for me over a period of years to be intimately connected with parts of my family. And it's a great gift. So I'm sharing it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's a great gift to spend time with the people we love, and especially young people we love. Even as we have these concerns, there are also these moments of joy and connection. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, seeing no other hands right now, I will light a final candle for any joys and concerns that might remain in our hearts unexpressed. There they are. And having shared some of these things that are so important to us, the joys and the sorrows, it is now time for us to come together as a community into a time of meditation and silence. We offer gratitude this morning for the interconnected web of life, for each of the ferns and humans and trees and chickens that we are connected to in our lives. And let us leave this time with a sense of hope and a sense of connection with one another. And now, will you please join in singing our second hymn, number 1023, Building Bridges.
Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to bridges, will you reach out to divisions? With all of our voices and all of our visions, with all of our voices and all of our visions, with all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
This morning's reading is pretty short. In fact, the introduction is going to be longer than the reading, but it comes from Chief Justice John Roberts' dissent in the Supreme Court case, Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn versus Andrew Cuomo, Governor of New York, which was decided in November 2020. In that case, the Supreme Court basically reversed its prior stand and granted an injunction preventing the carrying out of Governor Cuomo's COVID-19 regulations. And those regulations put severe restrictions on attendance at religious institutions in certain parts of New York City. Chief Justice Roberts dissented from the holding on the ground that because the governor had changed the classification of those churches, the issue no longer was a live issue. Had this to say about what the majority justices said about his fellow dissenters. And here's the quote. To be clear, I do not regard my dissenting colleagues as, quote, cutting the Constitution loose during a pandemic, close quote, yielding to a, quote, particular judicial impulse to stay out of the way in times of crisis, close quote, or, quote, sheltering in place when the Constitution is under attack. They simply view the matter differently after careful study and analysis, reflecting their best efforts to fulfill their responsibility under the Constitution. The title of my reflection this morning poses the question, is religious liberty under attack in this country today? I ask that question not because I personally think that religious liberty is under a greater threat today than as usual, but because while this issue may seem somewhat remote from many of the concerns that we in the Winchester Unitarian Society rightly focus upon, such as climate change and racial justice, I believe that we should recognize that for many throughout this country, the fear that their freedom of worship is threatened, particularly by the government, is a vitally important issue with, in my view, unfortunate political consequences. And it is also, unfortunately, an issue like so many today, where those on each side of the question seem unable to comprehend or credit with an honest difference of opinion those who disagree with them. In particular, it saddens me to say that after studying this matter, it appears that those who think religious liberty is under a worse threat today than ever before appear unable to credit those who disagree with them with having strong religious views and beliefs of their own. I can tell an anecdote that I know I've told to other people. I was once at a meeting of conservative lawyers, That's my fate, to be at a meeting of conservative lawyers. And I was in an elevator with two other men who I know, and they were deep in conversation. So I was not interrupting them, obviously, when one of them said to the other, "The problem with Democrats is that they don't go to church." Now, at that comment, I couldn't help but interrupt and said, "I'm very sorry to break into your conversation, but I'm from Massachusetts, which is a state filled with Democrats, and I assure you, most of them go to church." To which one of them then replied, "Well, that may be so, but I wonder what kind of Christianity they're being taught." Note the assumption that church always means Christianity, but I'll leave that aside. The point here I'm making is that the idea was that Democrats, because they're Democrats, have no religious views of their own. So this aspect of the issue I want to discuss, the inability of those who disagree almost to comprehend each other, has been exposed most clearly during the COVID-19 pandemic, what are for many of us regrettable but necessary restrictions on religious worship have come under fierce attack as being unconstitutional impositions on religious liberty. And because religious liberty in our country is a constitutional issue, the question of whether those COVID-19 restrictions are permissible under the Constitution is a legal one. And so this morning, at the risk of boring you all out of your minds, I'd like to look briefly at the majority and dissenting opinions in two major Supreme Court cases dealing with these restrictions. And I'm sorry to say that in the opinions of the justices, I see played out the anger aroused by this issue and the failure, regrettably, in my view, on the side of those opposing the restrictions, to credit those who disagree with them with having an honest viewpoint or even caring about religious liberty. I believe we're all familiar with those words from the First Amendment in the United States Constitution: "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." The importance of this provision in the minds of those who framed it is perhaps shown by the fact that it is the first right mentioned in the First Amendment. Religious liberty is guaranteed before freedom of expression or of the press or of the right to assembly. And that provision through the 14th Amendment applies to state governments in this country as well as to the federal government, and has long been recognized that the Free Exercise Clause enshrines the principle of religious liberty, guaranteeing that we all have the right to worship God or not as we choose. Clearly, the framers of the Bill of Rights recognize that religious liberty is essential to social peace, and even more so than free speech. We can be proud, I think, that our Constitution enshrined religious liberty so early, and that it became a model for many subsequent similar guarantees, including those contained in the Universal Declaration of Rights adopted by the United Nations in 1948 that I chose as our centering thought today. Importantly, the language of the First Amendment makes clear that not only is freedom of worship protected, but also religion in this country is and should be protected against discrimination by the state. As Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor stated in her dissent in that November 2020 case outlawing Governor Cuomo's strictures, quote, "Free exercise of religion is one of our most treasured and jealously guarded constitutional rights. States may not discriminate against religious institutions, even when faced with a crisis as deadly as this one." And she's referring, of course, to the COVID-19 pandemic. As I noted, this was from her dissenting opinion, so you know that she decided, or would have decided, that Governor Cuomo's restrictions did not discriminate against the plaintiff religious institutions, which were a Catholic church and a Jewish synagogue. The First Amendment's guarantee of religious liberty, of course, is important to all of us, including we Unitarian Universalists. And George Washington's words of the Hebrew congregation, however idealistic they may seem to sound to us today, are also important to us. And I can tell you that if you read the constitutional history of this principle, Unitarians have been active in many important efforts to preserve the First Amendment's protection for religious worship and religious institutions. It'll come as no surprise, however, especially to students of American history, that the enactment of the First Amendment and its extension to the states did not bring the religious peace that perhaps the framers and George Washington hoped for. Throughout our history, and especially in modern times, important legal challenges in the area of religion abound. And one reason for this is, of course, that in an increasingly complex society in which appropriate governmental regulation has become increasingly necessary, and also in which attitudes develop and change, clashes between secular governmental authority and the autonomy of religious institutions continue to occur. Another reason, and one that is very evident today, is that when society at large progresses, it may arrive at a place inconsistent with a given religion's value system. All of these pressures have been heightened during the COVID-19 pandemic, where in the absence under President Trump of any national response, governors of various states have been compelled to use their own executive powers to perhaps an unprecedented degree to combat the disease. And this has, in many cases, as we know, included restrictions on religious worship in their states. As I noted before, because the First Amendment is in our Constitution, and thus church-state issues and religious freedom are questions of constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court has been tasked time and time again with finding the right balance between religious freedom and the demands and requirements of our democratic society. And the right balance often yields results that we like and results that we don't like, whatever the composition of the Supreme Court. Thus, the Supreme Court's landmark decision in 1962 banning school prayer was one such balancing. And I should say one of the plaintiffs in that case was a Unitarian. And the court's equally consequential decision exactly 50 years later, that employment decisions made by religious institutions with regard to ministerial employees are not subject to anti-discrimination laws, was another type of balancing. I note that this last decision, saying that you couldn't bring an anti-discrimination claim if you were a ministerial employee and had been fired by your religious institution, that decision was unanimous. Even the so-called liberal justices voted for it, and that included Justice Ginsburg. Of course, when I talk about the balancing, what gives everybody in this field agita is that the Supreme Court decisions are not written in stone and are subject to change with changing times and new court majorities. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision in 2012 that a church could fire a ministerial employee for any reason without fear of anti-discrimination laws, whether one agrees with it or not, might demonstrate that religious liberty, or at least the protection of churches against governmental imposition, is alive and well in this country, even if at the expense of other very important societal goals. For example, that employees should not discriminate, that employers should not discriminate or fire employees for illegal discriminatory reasons. Yet the COVID-19 restrictions have raised again for many religious people, I should say mostly those in the conservative camp, the fear that today religious liberty is under attack as never before, a fear that has been exploited shamelessly by former President Trump. And that fear, stoked by Trump, has had and may yet have dire political consequences. Perhaps the most extreme expression recently of this point of view was a talk given by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in November 2020 at the Federalist Society in Washington, D.C. In that talk, Justice Alito went so far as to claim, "It pains me to say this, but in certain quarters, religious liberty is fast becoming a disfavored right, and that marks a surprising turn of events." Among the examples Justice Alito mentioned to support this statement were the anti-religious sentiments that caused the Supreme Court to reverse the decision against the bakery that refused to bake a cake for a gay marriage, the ongoing litigation against the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic order of nuns that does not offer birth control in their employee health insurance, and most importantly, the Supreme Court's treatment as of that time of COVID-19 restrictions. Justice Alito particularly called out the Nevada restrictions, which limited to 50 the number of people who could attend a religious institution, but said that half of the normal number of people could attend casinos in the state. The Supreme Court did not refuse to hear that case. When Alito gave this speech, only one case dealing with COVID-19 restrictions had been decided by the Supreme Court in May 2020, a few months before the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that case found that the restrictions on worship at issue in California passed constitutional muster. Subsequently, a second case was decided in November 2020, one month after Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed. And this case found just the opposite. They're in stark contrast, and what is most worrying is that the contrast appears to be driven by stark differences in frames of reference. In the first case, South Bay United Pentecostal Church against Gavin Newsom, governor of California, the majority rejected the challenge to the restrictions ordered by the governor that limited attendance at places of worship to 25% of building capacity or a maximum of 100 attendees. The majority opinion by Chief Justice Roberts held as follows. Although California's guidelines place restrictions on places of worship, those restrictions appear consistent with the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. Similar or more severe restrictions apply to comparable secular gatherings, including lectures, concerts, movie showings, spectator sports, and theatrical performances, where large groups of people gather in close proximity for extended periods of time. And the order exempts or treats more leniently only to similar activities, such as operating grocery stores, banks, and laundromats, in which people neither congregate in large numbers nor remain in close proximity for extended periods. Justice Kavanaugh wrote a dissent, joined by Justices Thomas and Gorsuch, 3 conservative justices, in which, as the basis for his dissent, he gave a completely different depiction of the issue. He said the basic constitutional problem with California's COVID-19 restrictions on religious institutions is that comparable secular businesses are not subject to a 25% occupancy cap, including factories, offices, supermarkets, restaurants, retail stores, pharmacies, shopping malls, pet grooming shops, bookstores, florists, hair salons, and cannabis dispensaries. Clearly, Kavanaugh and his fellow dissenters did not perceive the same reality that Roberts and the majority saw, namely that attendance at a religious service is different from shopping at a mall or going to a pet grooming store, etc. Now, I have experienced this particular form of blindness myself in a forum I attended remotely on COVID-19 restrictions, where one participant criticized them because the same restrictions did not apply to shopping in a supermarket. When I pointed out the different quality of religious worship, my comment fell on deaf ears. The same important difference in perception was present in the second COVID-19 religious restriction case the Supreme Court decided in November 2020, in which the court granted an injunction against the restrictions imposed on certain houses of worship in New York City by an executive order of New York Governor Cuomo. To be sure, the restrictions at issue were quite different. In Governor Cuomo's executive order, he held that churches that were in a so-called red or orange zones had to be severely limited. In red zones, to no more than 10 persons who could attend a religious service, and in orange zones, to no more than 25 who could attend. Red and orange zones referred to the COVID-19 danger in those areas. In reaching an opposite conclusion from that reached in the earlier case, the majority again, however, saw no difference between attending a religious service or going to a grocery store, pet store, or big box store down the street. In contrast, Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, who would have upheld the regulations, echoed Chief Justice Roberts' majority opinion in the earlier case, focusing on activities more akin to attending a religious service. She pointed out that the New York regulation, in fact, treated houses of worship in those zones more favorably than what she saw as their secular counterparts, referring to the fact that movie theaters, concert venues, and sporting arenas were required to close entirely. Similarly, Justice Breyer, who also dissented, noted that the federal district court, which had first heard the matter, found the governor's regulations treated religious gatherings more favorably than similar gatherings with comparable risks, such as public lectures, concerts, or theatrical performances. Obviously, these points cut no mustard with the opponents of any restriction at all on religious worship. I should note that, to be fair, that the churches and synagogues in question all agree that they would abide by the other mandated safety measures, including social distancing and wearing masks. But what to me is most worrying about these two cases is the fact that the justices siding with those who oppose the restrictions all characterize the regulation and their fellow justices who would have upheld them as being at worst hostile to, and at best indifferent in the issue of religious liberty presented in this case. So, for example, in his concurrence in this case, which stopped the enforcement of Governor Cuomo's order, Justice Gorsuch wrote, "So at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it is always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your distal points and meridians. Who knew public health would so perfectly align with secular convenience?" And Justice Gorsuch concluded his opinion as follows: "It is time, past time, to make plain that while the pandemic poses many grave challenges, there is no world in which the Constitution tolerates color-coded executive edicts that reopen liquor stores and bike shops, but shutter churches, synagogues, and mosques. Again, the dissimilarity between the two activities of going to a liquor store, a bike shop, and going to a religious service doesn't come into it. And as to why some of his fellow justices were on the other side of the question, Gorsuch said, "In the end, I can only surmise that much of the answer lies in a particular judicial impulse to stay out of the way in times of crisis." And he continued that impulse may be understandable, but not when the Constitution is under attack. This critique of his fellow justices was echoed by Justice Kavanaugh. He said, "By judicial deference in an emergency or a crisis does not mean wholesale judicial abdication, especially when important questions of religious discrimination, racial discrimination, free speech, or the like are raised." And of course, that issue, again, is, I think, once again, not paying attention to the dissenter's view that religious discrimination is barred, but it's not present in this case. Given these sentiments, the reading today, the short sentence from Justice Roberts' dissenting opinion, in which he says, wait a minute, these are not enemies of religion. These dissenters are people who have come to a different view reasonably, makes me feel at least thankful that there is one adult in the room, reminding his fellow conservatives that those who disagree simply and honestly view the matter differently, and that their views should be treated with respect. I could go on, but I fear that too much law is a bad thing on a Sunday morning. What these two decisions show, in my view, is that the religious liberty issue is one that we should pay attention to because it is not going away, especially given how, in a world we are living in, it will be exploited by those hoping to gain power by doing so. And because the fear that has been engendered has political consequences, it also could have an impact on those very other issues that we as Unitarian Universalists feel so strongly about. So we must be sensitive to this issue. We must be sensitive to the fears expressed by Justice Alito and others who view the religious landscape as he does, and be open to a dialogue with them, treating their views with respect, but not abandoning our own. That is a challenge for us, as in so many other areas today, to understand those who disagree with us, really understand them, and work to find a common ground. Can we do this in this area? I hope so. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Martin. Each week at this time, we make an offering to support the work of this church. The offering is a spiritual practice. It benefits both the recipients and the givers by softening our hearts and helping us exercise the muscles of our generosity. It is a collective affirmation of our shared values and a commitment to the mission of this liberal religious congregation. There are many ways to donate. Through giving online through our website, through the smartphone app Give Plus, through PayPal, or by mailing a check to the Winchester Unitarian Society, 478 Main Street, Winchester, Massachusetts, 01890. Please write or type the date of your offering in the memo line or comment field. Note that contributing soon, in lieu of one lump sum for a period of time, is easier for us to process and empowers us to send our collective gift as soon as possible. Our practice is to invite first-time worship attendees to be our guests. In lieu of a contribution, please complete the virtual visitor card so we can stay connected beyond this Sunday. The offering will now be generously given and gratefully received. Those who wish to do so are invited to join in reading together the community affirmation. We gather not for ourselves alone, but to use our common power to build the beloved community within and beyond these walls. We create and reaffirm this covenant this day to make justice flourish, to practice compassion amidst difference, and to embody transformative love. Now, let us join together in singing our closing hymn, Peace, the Perfect Word.
Peace, the perfect word is sounding like a universal hymn. Under oceans, over mountains, to the world's remotest rim. Toiling centuries have struggled upward on a stony way, just to set a torch of freedom where it flames aloft today. All the old forlorn lost causes, every fair forbidden dream, and the prophet's hopeless vision, and the poet's fitting gleam. All the hopes of subject peoples, all the dreams of the oppressed, must be ours, our hopes, our visions. We can never stay or rest.
The words of our benediction today are by James Morrison and are titled, Share Your Glorious Light with the World. Within each of our hearts, there is a most glorious light. Go forth and let its spark help you understand what troubles both you and others. Go forth and let the light of reason be a guide in your decisions. Go forth and bring its ray of hope to those in need of help in both body and spirit, that they may find healing. Go forth and fan the flames of passion to help heal the world. Go forth and spread the warm glow of love, pushing back the darkness of the world. Go forth and share your glorious light with the world.
Please join us in reading together the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. This service has ended, but our life of service continues. Thank you to Martin, Nancy, John, and Kai for their help in getting this service out to people today. As we acknowledge those who made today's service possible, let us continue our conversation in the chat. After a few minutes, Kai will put us into randomly assigned breakout rooms for unmuted conversation. And after a few minutes, all will be invited back to the main Zoom room for a conversation about the service.
All right, everyone, I'm gonna break us up into a couple of breakout rooms. And here we go.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Fritzy, just to go on Lee's point, the Unitarians, the Harvard Divinity School became largely Unitarian